Time for another totally non-controversial, totally safe for YouTube iceberg. Hello everybody and welcome back to Wendigoon. Today we are covering the religion and cult iceberg. Now I need to get a few things out of the way before we get started. This iceberg does contain definitive cults, however that doesn't mean everything on this iceberg is a cult per se. The first ones that we're going to be looking at are just sort of fringe religious groups that don't really have that much of a following, and whenever I talk about them, I in no way want to get across the point that they are a cult just because they're on this list. As a matter of fact, even as we go further down on this list, some of the ones that we're going to run into are kind of structured weird. So like you'll have sort of safe ideologies next to very not safe ideologies, and I'm not really sure how that works. So just because something's on here, and even if it's on the same tier as a very dangerous or bad thing, that doesn't mean that it itself is bad. It just means, if anything, that it's just not as well known. Also, and I want to make this very clear, I am not a theologist by any means. Some of these I've never heard of and educated myself in the past couple days over. Religions are very intensive and long spanning with their history and the reason practitioners do the things they do and what their belief is. So in no way take me as like the final authority on these things, as I'm getting my information through text, whereas in the real life, these ideologies may be much more one way in emotions or the other, or their practices could be much more spiritual or physical than I make them out to be, or yada yada yada. What I'm saying is, if you're interested in any of these, I encourage you to do your own research, as I am in no way the final authority on what these religions mean. Like I said before, this video is for educational purposes and for entertainment, so I'm not saying anything on here to be offensive to anyone or to tell you or educate you on what your own religion or what someone else's might be. This is entirely a sort of gloss over basic concepts of these ideologies, and I hold full respect to all involved, at least until we get to the bottom tiers, where I don't hold any respect for them, but we'll get to that. Speaking of bottom tiers, this is your viewer discretion. I will be more specific as we get closer, but right now saying there are going to be very intense themes in the bottom tiers as we go from sort of like rare religions down to specific events in which people were hurt in very extreme ways in some cases. So this is your warning now. There will be a warning then, but viewer discretion advised. If you're not okay with heavy topics, you may want to set this one out, or at least set it out whenever we get to the bottom. There will be timestamps for each tier in the description. So there's your disclaimers. We got a lot to cover, so let's get into it. But as always, thank you for watching. So I'm going to do something that I've never done, and I'm going to skip the first two tiers of this iceberg. The reason for it is they're just religions that are rather well known. Like tier 1 had things like Catholicism and Buddhism, and tier 2 had like Mormonism and Sufism, and those are common religions that we're all familiar with. The purpose of this is to kind of look at things that you may not be familiar with, or at least I wasn't familiar with before. So like I said, we're going to skip the first two and move into the first niche ideologies with tier 3. So starting with tier 3 is Scientology. Scientology is something that you're definitely familiar with if you've been on the internet for a while, and is a religion that was founded by L. Ron Hubbard. The basic faith belief system of Scientology is that we as humans are actually Thetans, that was created by an alien known as Xenu, who put us on Earth several million years ago and will one day come back to take us away from it. Xenu theirself exist as a member of the Galactic Confederacy, and the actual canon for Scientology is known as the space opera. But what most people are interested in is the church's interactions with the world around them. Like, for example, the number of celebrities that are a member of the church, as well as super secret shady undergoings that happen within the church, leading several people to believe that it's all a front for some greater New World Order, Illuminati conspiracy thing. Stack on top of that, stories of abuse have happened in the church, as well as cover-ups that have happened with people who have passed away by odd circumstances. One of the most famous interactions is Tom Cruise, who publicly shamed people for using medicine, and psychiatrists saying that the church's teaching should be all you need. And yeah, stuff like that. It just gets kind of weird. Nation of Islam was founded by Wallace Muhammad in Chicago. I also want to say this now because it applies to this one. If at any point I say that something has, say, core Christian values or core Church of Latter-day Saint values, it in no way means that this group is representative of the whole of that ideology. To give you an example that you may be more familiar with, the KKK, for example, had beliefs that came off of the Hebrew, Christian, Judaic prophecy, but they are in no way representative of Christianity across the world as a whole. The same applies to this. So if at any point I say that this has ideas of Islam or Judaism or whatever, it's just saying that they share some of the values with those people, not that they are what all of those people are. Making sure. The reason I specify that now is because Nation of Islam is a very fringe group that believes in full black supremacy. They believe that African Americans are the true chosen people of God, and that white people specifically were created thousands of years ago as an experiment by an evil scientist. No, I'm not kidding. So by that logic, white people are fake and have no souls. And according to their belief, one day God will come back and take exclusively the African Americans into heaven and leave all of the soulless people to die, I guess. They're also super conservative in their belief system, saying that people should dress appropriately and wear very straight-edged attire, and have since opened up the nation to different races as long as you're not white. Christian Science was founded off of the book Science and Health by Mary Eddy. The basic concept is that sickness isn't real and is instead an illusion, and through prayer alone you can get rid of all sickness. This belief system has kind of died down in recent years, with modern proponents saying that, well, I guess medicine helps, but only if you also pray about it, and has worked its way into other natural sciences as well. LaVeyan Satanism was founded by Anton LaVey. The core principles of the religion come from Friedrich Nietzsche and Ayn Rand. Basically ideas that nothing really matters and humans should live communally. The thing about LaVeyan Satanism that not a lot of people get is, while it does share the name, it is not a direct worship of Satan himself. Instead, it's more so of a worship of humanity itself. The religion is very materialist, and they don't have any beliefs in worshiping a higher god or power, instead just existing, and if it feels good, do it. As well as pertaining some aspects of magic beliefs, they are very similar to the beliefs of the Antichrist, even if inadvertently so. See, a lot of people have the idea that the Antichrist in biblical prophecy is just an evil figure that acts like the devil, but in actuality it is a forerunner for the devil that instead turns people to look at themselves instead of God. So in that fashion, LaVeyan Satanism kind of falls in line with that as a way of getting people to focus on the inward man rather than the outward body or outward spirit. I don't know, that's just an interesting parallel that I found while researching this, that while not directly worshiping Satan, it is technically, through cause and effect, getting across the point of Satan. So, potato, tomato. Amish Old Order is what a lot of people think of whenever they think of Amish in general. However, if you thought regular Amish were strict in only wearing certain materials, Old Order Amish aren't allowed to wear things like button zippers or bright colors. Not only that, but men are not allowed to cut their beards, as women are not allowed to cut their hair. And they maintain more traditional ideas, such as a very hardcore belief in Christian pacifism, as in fighting is a last resort. And they don't maintain church bodies, instead choosing to worship at members' houses from time to time, as in the whole idea that God is not a place, instead a body of people. Falun Gong is a Buddhist Taoist mix that popped up in China. Despite being a very peaceful religion of meditation and independence as well as examining the inner self, the Chinese government did not take kindly to a fast-growing religion that they did not have control of. So therefore, in 1999, they locked down the religion and made it illegal. With no exaggeration, China literally killed thousands of Falun Gong members in jail, with rumors even persisting that their bodies were used for the underground Chinese organ trade. It's an example of extreme religious prejudice within a country's government. Hoodoo is the roots of the very popular, or at least famous, voodoo. The roots of hoodoo are very interesting, as they came from African countries into the American South and mixed with the indigenous culture at the time and created this sort of blend between two different kinds of native beliefs. Even some of the beliefs in gods and spirits can be seen as a sort of combination between African Islam and American Christianity. While there is a core belief system, what hoodoo is most known for is its practicality in magic and how performances of rituals and spells can lead to physically obtainable things in the real world. Messianic Jews are essentially Jewish traditions that believe in the Messiah or Jesus. Or in other words, it is the religion of Judaism, but they also incorporate the New Testament. It's an interesting example of sort of a middle ground that's met between two supposedly entirely different religions. ISKCON stands for the International Society of Krishna Consciousness. ISKCON holds several traditional Indian beliefs such as Vishnu and Krishna. However, they are much more physical with their interpretation of it, partaking of their worship primarily through versions of singing and dance. Because of this, festivals are a very important part of the ISKCON tradition. However, despite this, they are very reserved in other ideas, such as they do not partake of any premarital kissing, gambling, or intoxicants. Also, in the disturbing movie Iceberg, everyone was confused by kith for some reason. It's the word kiss, pronounced like Mike Tyson, so kith, and I use it to not get demonetized whenever I'm talking about naughty stuff. And like it or not, if I'm doing this full time, I want to be monetized. You'll be familiar with Gnosticism if you watch the conspiracy theory Iceberg. However, for those that don't, Gnosticism is essentially Christianity with a polytheistic idea of lesser gods. What that means is, yes, Christ and the Godhead exist, however, there are these smaller gods that are in charge of doing certain things on Earth. And the reason that bad things happen on Earth is because Earth was made by an evil god. Besides that, a lot of it's sort of more like magic spiritual sense than standard Christianity. Like, for example, instead of sin and redemption, they more so follow the ideas of illusion and enlightenment, saying that things are not necessarily wrong, they're just not understood. Opus Dei, from all of my research, just seems to be a sort of laid-back version of Catholicism. Like, for example, they don't partake in big church gatherings or mass, and while they believe in the teachings of Catholicism, they more so believe that every person themselves is a layman or worker for God, and the organization itself is much smaller, with the entire thing having about 2,000 priests. Kabbalah is often described as Jewish mysticism. Put shortly, it's about understanding the barrier between God and man. In other words, there is this sort of fabric that exists around us that separates us from the higher realm of being, so a lot of this ideology is a way of sort of meditating or introspection in order to rise to the next plane of thought. Neo-shamanism is a new iteration of Native American beliefs. It's sort of an amalgamation of several different native tribes now in the modern sense through being able to be connected, have sort of established an overall pantheistic canon of their religion. In other words, using the knowledge gained by other tribes, neo-shamans kind of put together this entire idea of how the world works, how the spirit works, how healing works, and things like that. Saratu Hinduism is Hinduism, however, there is a very heavy reliance in rituals over beliefs. Or basically, doing specific acts is more important than simply believing or saying something. As you can imagine, rituals are a big deal within the religion, as well as oral traditions which are passed down instead of written or transcribed as is standard with most religions. That is it with Tier 3. We are now on to Tier 4. Starting with Hardline, the letter that YouTube won't let me say because it's dumb for some reason. Anon. Blank. Anon rose to popularity in recent years after the American 2016 election. The basic belief is that all of the world's elites are conspiring in a sort of secret society in order to maintain control of the world from behind the veil. This cabal of the elite is responsible, according to Anon's theories, of everything from human abductions to the results of world elections. It's very reliant on the ideas of secret societies being proliferated across the world. 5% Nation was started by a man named Clarence Smith, who left the Nation of Islam. Clarence Smith felt very led by Malcolm X, who was an at the time big member in the Nation of Islam, to go and start his own group, which he called 5% Nation, or Nations of Gods and Earths. 5% Nation was basically Nation of Islam, only even more so. Clarence renamed himself Allah the Father, and the word 5% Nation comes from the idea that 85% of the world is ignorant, 10% of it is evil, and only 5% know the truth and are good enough to change it. Speaking of being Nation of Islam only more so, rather than just thinking that white people were created as an experiment, according to 5% Nation, white people are literally demons that have risen up from hell as a means of destroying God's people. And it's basically a fringe offshoot of an already fringe offshoot. Muslim Brotherhood's on here. I know it originates in Egypt. However, I am not qualified to talk about this, nor was I able to find information that made me feel like I was qualified to talk about this. So rather than sounding dumb, I'm just going to skip it. Sorry. Peyote religion is a name often attributed to the Native American church. What's interesting is the Native American church kind of came as a result of Christian missionaries coming to the native tribes. So instead of believing in several spirits, they believe in the Great Spirit, which according to members is synonymous with Jesus Christ. The reason they're called the Peyote religion is because they believe that peyote can be used as a gateway to speak to the Great Spirit or to at least escape this realm of existence for a limited time. Because of this, in the majority of their practices and worship services, peyote is used. Cargo cults was really interesting and I had never heard of before researching this. Post-World War II, there were specific groups of people, specifically in Melanesia, who were gifted gifts by more technologically advanced societies such as the United States and Great Britain. Upon coming back to deliver these people more gifts, it was found that they were imitating the acts of the soldiers that were there whenever they were brought the first round of goods. So in other words, whenever the ships would show back up, they would be holding sticks like rifles and walking around in troop formation, thinking that by mimicking the people that brought them gifts, they could bring them back. It's a very interesting sort of like glass bubble of how a society would react if not given any information about how things like that carry out or how technology advances. It's a really cool rabbit hole to go down if you're interested. Church of Subgenius kind of exists as a parody of religion. Their prophet, J.R. Bob Dobbs, was a door-to-door salesman. Get it? Because religion, he's a salesman. Haha. And according to them, all other religions of the world are a part of a greater conspiracy in order to keep smart-thinking people down. But at the same time, they believe in a lot of popular gods. Their main god is known as Jehovah One, but they also believe in like Odin and other deities, I guess. What's interesting is, while this kind of feels like a Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster thing, it seems as if some people actually believe in the religion nowadays. That or I just took the bait. Either way, good on you. Chaos magic is a modern name given to results-based magic. Or in other words, rather than getting sort of ideas or self-enlightenment or something like that out of magic, you get a very physical, obtainable goal. This is what a lot of people think in their head whenever they think of magic itself. While there are beliefs, they're kind of secondary to the point, and chaos magic users will actually manipulate their belief system in order to get whatever result they want. Society for Ethical Culture is the godless religion. They believe that morality exists apart from faith, and therefore people do not need to be faithful or believe in a god in order to be good people. They have churches and services, but rather than talking about a specific god or worship, they instead talk about how to better yourself and how to be a better person. They're big on concepts such as motivation and philanthropy, and believe that the individual should always strive to be the best they can, regardless of whatever higher order tells them to or not. Mandaism is hard to put a pin on, but the chief idea is that it's sort of like a Gnostic Abrahamic faith, sorta. In the Quran, it mentions people way back who could have been a sort of Mandaist, although it's not confirmed. And their main distinction from Abrahamic ideas such as Christianity and Islam is that they are very spiritual with their ideas, such as they believe that after death you go to the worlds of light, which is what we see whenever we look at stars, as well as believing in energy of areas such as Old World, which is where they make the majority of their stay. However, it's hard to kind of figure out a ton about them as they're very secretive and there's not a lot of members, so make of that what you will. Romuva can best be described as Lithuanians before Christianity. Or in other words, it was Lithuanians with a much more polytheist sort of pagan idea of what God is. A lot of their beliefs come from Baltic folklore, and there is a big emphasis on nature and ancestry. So rather than so much worshiping a one god deity, it is more so ideas of worshiping what is around you and the people who came before you. Chinese underground church is essentially Western Christianity in communist China. See, religions that do not directly answer to the Chinese government are illegal. And while they may allow it to exist to some capacity, if a church gets to any degree to actually call itself a church, they'll immediately shut it down. Because of this, underground churches, or house churches as they're called, meet in the houses of certain members. This is as a way to avoid persecution, and as far as fringe religions go, they have to be if they want to stay operating. We are now on to tier 5, which is getting into a bit more of the sort of out there ideas. You'll see what I mean. The first of tier 5, the Igbo Jews, which is essentially Judaism incorporated into the Igbo people of Nigeria, follow to every degree traditional Judaism. However, the difference is they believe that they themselves are the chosen people of God. Or in other words, they think themselves to be the true Israelites instead of the people of Israel, which is the reason they practice Judaism so intently. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have Christian identity, which is the idea that only whites, such as Anglo-Saxons and Germanics, are the descendants of Abraham and therefore God's chosen people. However, this isn't really a religion as much as it is an idea that exists in some religious groups. And some of the other ideas they get into are also weird, like serpent seed doctrine, which I talked about that in the Iceberg. You can look that one up for yourself. And as with most of the things on here, it is generally shunned by the majority of people who practice the religion as well. Raelism is the idea that humans are not existent as the product of some deity, but were instead invented by an alien known as Elohim. Because of that, oddly enough, it's an atheistic religion, believing that there is no God and we are simply the results of a sort of science experiment. According to them, Elohim sent down 40 prophets in order to foretell whenever he would come back to take his experiments with him, and among these 40 prophets were Buddha and Jesus. General consensus is that they are strong proponents of science and also believe in the ancient aliens theory, or the idea that aliens came down and started humanity as we know it, and they hope to find immortality through the use of cloning. So that's cool. Wahhabism is, from all the information I can find, conservative Islam. However, much like the Brotherhood one I mentioned earlier, there was not enough information for me to find anything substantial to say about it, and rather than looking like an idiot, I'm just going to move on. Shinriko, also known as Aleph, is a controversial group to say the least. They incorporate elements from Shiva to general Christianity to yoga and even Nostradamus, with one of their main proponents being that of a doomsday prophecy, or more specifically that the US is the beast mentioned in the book of Revelations that will bring it into the known world. Because of this, certain extremists of the group were responsible for the Tokyo sarin attacks of 1995 that killed several innocent people. However, even though that happened, and we're going to see examples later on in the list of groups that it can't really be argued that the whole group wasn't in agreement of the bad thing that happened, I will say for this one that it seems the majority of people of the group disagreed with the attacks, and I don't want to condemn an entire ideology off of the actions of a few. So just making that clear. Santa Muerta is pretty much a female personification of death. Quite literally, a skeleton that is dressed up in female's clothes and believed to be a sort of harbinger of death that is to be worshipped. It's another example of Mexican and Spanish culture having a very rooted belief in ideas of death, all the way from the Day of the Dead celebrations to things that the Spanish Inquisition saw whenever they first came over. It's a modern concept of worshiping death in a very upbeat and charismatic mood as what one might expect. Latter Rain is a movement that has happened in some Pentecostal churches after World War II. It essentially reincorporated the idea that in the modern sense, the spirit can interact directly with humanity as a means of performing physical actions. Or in other words, one can become Holy Spirit filled and do things such as healing or speak in tongues. It was a response to the evangelical revival which had just occurred, and was one of the first parts of something known as the charismatic movement, or as historians call it, the age in which religion became popular with the idea of words and catches in order to get new converts in. Shugendo is an interesting combination of folk religion and Buddhism. A lot of their belief resides in the supernatural, and even the idea that if one gets close enough to ideas of Buddhism that they can obtain these sort of supernatural powers. What's really cool about the religion is they exist, in the majority at least, in mountain ranges across Japan. So their temples are hidden in the backs of these giant mountain ranges. So you can just be going over a completely green area and then there's a giant temple in front of you. It's a pretty neat idea. Dalit Buddhism is an Indian reinterpretation of Buddhism. It goes directly against the idea of the Indian caste system and promotes the ideas of equality amongst people. It also exists as more of a physical religion than most, or in other words, ideas aren't so much about spiritualism and praying as much as actions and action in public. Sedevacantist, probably how you pronounce it, is an offshoot of Catholicism who believes that the Holy See position, or in other words the Pope, has been left empty for several years. Different groups have different ideas of how long it's been gone, some dating back to the 20s, others recently as the 80s. But the general consensus is that the Catholic Church as it is now is not saying what the Catholic Church should, and therefore the leader is a sort of false prophet and they don't believe in the Pope. We'll see more specific examples of this later on in the list. Nuwabianism was started by Dwight York in 1991 and exists as a kind of UFO religion. Dwight York managed to grow the religion to such a degree that in Putnam County, Georgia, he built a complex known as Tamaray, which was inspired off the Egyptian pyramids. Most of their ideas revolved around the idea that aliens have been interacting with human society for a long time and that we need to prepare for their return. However, we'll never know how that went because the group was disbanded in 2004 whenever Dwight was sentenced to 135 years in prison for finance fraud and touching kids. So, yeah. The cult of angels, or Yazdanism as it's called, is essentially a form of pre-Islamic Kurds, or in other words, how the Kurdish people existed before Islam came into the region. They believe in Zoroastrianism and the Anunnaki, which are a specific version of the ancient aliens concept, and their belief system is interesting, as they have a sort of pantheon in which they accept several different ideas of the Abrahamic faith, and in practice they incorporate both the Bible and the Quran. We are now on to tier 6, and here we go. The Moorish Science Temple is an offshoot of Islam that believes that African Americans are the direct descendants of the Moabites. Yep, the organization was started by Noble Ali, who said he met with an Egyptian priest who said that he was blessed and an incarnation of a prophet that was made in order to lead his people. The group itself is very mystic, with Ali himself saying that he has found a version of the Quran that has been lost to everyone else, and they won't really let anyone else read it, and it's the book for their religion. So yeah, what was interesting in researching this, there was one article I was reading, I forget from where it was talking about this group, and it's like, Noble Ali made this in order to give the African Americans of the community something to do. I'm like, are you sure about that? I don't think so. I think he wanted to be God. Fundamentalist polygamous desert compound Mormons are the extreme conservative branch of Mormonism that is shunned by the entirety of Mormonism. Mormonism itself was founded by Joseph Smith. However, from the original teachings, the religion has come a long way. That is not, however, the case with the specific group of Mormons that we're talking about. These specific, very conservative groups of Mormons believe in things such as polygamy, continuous revelations, or in other words, at any point someone can have a word from God and therefore add on to the canon of scripture, and United Order Commune, which is just a way of saying people should exist within a commune. There are very few of these, no more than a total of 10,000, and all of these people have been excommunicated from the actual Church of Latter-day Saints for the practice of polygamy. So yeah, Ringing Cedars Anastasianism was started in Russia in 1997. It comes from a book called The Ringing Cedars of Russia, in which the author said he met a person in the woods known as Anastasia, who was a deity who then told him how the world truly operates. The religion itself believes in a very holistic belief in what God and the world is, and that they all exist as sort of an intertwined being. And the actual word itself, ringing cedars, comes from the idea that there are subtle vibrations that exist everywhere, and that is the interconnected layer that holds all of the world together. Also, this religion normally lives together in these sort of commune settlements, primarily around the taiga area of the Siberian wilderness. Appalachian snake churches came off the holiness movement at the turn of the century. The majority of practitioners come from the Pentecost faith, and the whole thing exists itself as another part of the charismatic movement I talked about earlier. The guy who started it, George Hensley, drove from place to place, encouraging more and more people to do snake handling. The core belief of it comes from the disciples in the New Testament, whenever Jesus tells them that they don't have to fear snakes, they can pick them up and they won't be hurt, and the story of whenever several people are bit by dangerous snakes on the island of, I believe, Malta, with Paul, and Paul says that they'll all be healed. So George took that idea and applied it to the modern day, and he doubled down and said that if anyone is bitten and killed by a venomous snake, then they just weren't faithful enough. To which in 1955, George was bitten and killed by a venomous snake. Snake handling is very dangerous. A lot of people die doing it, so much so to the point there's been legislation in many states and in Kentucky where they specifically said snakes cannot be used for religious purposes. Moonies, also known as the Unification Movement, comes from its founder, Sun Moon. They're most known as being the group of people that has the mass weddings, but they also have some other other interesting traditions, such as they're one of the only new religions to have a completely original text, as well as a specific flag that is draped over members of the church's casket at funerals. According to their core belief, Jesus could not complete his mission on earth because he was killed before he could have children. Because of this, Sun Moon, the religion's founder, is the reincarnation of Jesus and the new Messiah. And they basically just operate as a normal religion outside of that, with just the belief that they have a current living Messiah. Ravita's path, also known as Ravidisya, is a sort of spiritualistic belief that originated in India. They hold a lot of respect for the religion's gurus and hold a belief that the human soul is a part of God itself. The religion was closely identified with Sikhism until in 2009, a group of Sikhs killed a guru of Ravidas. I can't pronounce it. And now they're not so closely related with Sikhs anymore, as you could imagine. Michael Teachings is a sort of belief system that originated from a Ouija board game played in the 1970s. In San Francisco, a group of friends were playing with a Ouija board in which someone who identified themselves as Michael began talking to them. On subsequent sessions, Michael continued to talk to them, to which they began to write down his teachings, and then published all of them into a book that started its own belief system. And if you're curious what the teachings are, basically be agape, love everybody, and psychology is important. And that's what I got out of it. Anti-Israel Zionist, I'll be honest, I didn't understand. I thought that it was saying that Zion, as in the land of Israel, is important and the people that are living there aren't. But then I saw something else that said it wasn't important. And to be honest, again, I'm just not sure about this one, so I will leave this to you all. All right, here we are, tier 7, and we are getting into the good stuff. Greek Orthodox old calendar is one of the pettiest departures I've ever seen, and I normally wouldn't say that about an entire religion, but from everything I've read, like, come on, guys. So from everything I read, Greek Orthodox old calendar is the exact same as Greek Orthodox, only they disagree on the calendar. So you could be asking yourself, how much does that old calendar matter? They did not, in the 1500s, want to make the transition from the Julian calendar to the revised Julian calendar. What's the difference? Well, according to the revised Julian calendar, if a year is divisible by 100, it is not a leap year, unless, of course, when divided by 900, it comes out to 2 or 600. What difference does that make? Well, from now until the year 2800, it will be one day. The reason the calendar was revised like that was because it would basically line people up with the Gregorian calendar. However, Greek Orthodox old calendar said no, and they kept their old calendar, and it is an entirely separate religion to this day because they didn't want to change the leap years. Cool. The ghost dance is a concept that was incorporated into several Western Native American traditions. Ghost dance is believed to sort of been an offshoot of round dancing, only done in a more sacred spiritual manner as a way of contacting either the dead or the spirits. This would be done by the Native Americans to receive everything from guidance to battle preparedness to even the halt of westward expansion. This was started by a native named Jack Wilson, who worked as a sort of prophet going from tribe to tribe, teaching people the ghost dance. The ghost dance itself was very malleable, with some groups taking certain parts of it and adapting into their culture, and others taking just the ideas, and it kind of worked its way to be a part of several different cultures. That was until it made its way to the Lakota tribe. See, Jack taught the Lakota tribe shortly before the Battle of Wounded Knee, in which the natives were massacred by the white settlers. Because of this, several tribes that Jack traveled to afterwards did not want to incorporate it, thinking that it may be some sort of bad omen. For example, the Navajo never took part in it. And because of this, the dance just kind of faded out, and it's not really practiced in any real regards now. However, the traces of it can be taken back to the roots of several different native ideologies. Branch Davidians were began by a man named David Koresh in Waco, Texas. David Koresh believed himself to be the forerunner of Christ, and that he was set up as a way to foretell of the coming doomsday. In order to be ready for it, David Koresh assembled his people into one commune that existed in Waco, Texas, with the basic idea of giving up worldly pleasures in hope for spiritual enlightenment. Of course, that didn't stop him from playing music and drinking and being the only one in the commune who was allowed to have children, but again, that's neither here nor there. To those around the commune, they said that Koresh and the Branch Davidians were very American and just seemed like your average old group of people. However, the people were propelled to a state of infamy when in 1993 the ATF attempted to raid the compound in hope of finding illegal weapons. However, during the raid, the ATF killed 76 people, the majority of them being women and children. And needless to say, that was the end of the Branch Davidians. Because remember, kids, there's no law so trivial that the government won't kill you for it. The problem that happens with the Branch Davidians is a lot of people sort of justify it because, don't get me wrong, David Koresh was a horrible person. It is a known fact that he was abusing at least 2 children within the compound. However, if you're trying to keep children from being abused, maybe the solution isn't to kill all of them. Just a thought. Moving on. MHFM stands for the Most Holy Family Monastery. This is an example of the set of vacantists, the things that don't believe in the Pope, that I mentioned earlier in Fillmore, New York. What's interesting is the ways they sort of circumnavigate the Catholic Church. Like, for example, all of their communion and their priests has to be brought down from the Catholic Church in order to officially be Catholic, but since they don't believe in the Pope, they don't want to do it through the Vatican. So they get a sort of Byzantine moderator to technically, sanctify it. And in 2020, they got so fed up with the Catholic Church that they said it is heresy to attend a Pope-ordained Catholic service. Also in research, for some reason, I kept finding information that they denied the Holocaust. So, okay, go off, I guess. One Law Hebrew roots is essentially evangelical Christianity with the Torah from Judaism. What that means is they really push home a lot of the Old Testament ideas that were prevalent in Judaism, such as the Sabbath and the Ten Commandments. And they even believe, off of the ideas before, that this is the natural conclusion before the return of Christ. They believe that the first step of the modern Western American church was that of holiness, and then faith healing, and then charismaticness, and now Judaism, meaning that if they continue to act this way, it will speed up the return of Christ. Independent Scientology, also known as the Free Zone, has all of the beliefs of Scientology with none of the organizational part. They go off of the saying, the work was free, keep it so, implying that the Church of Scientology is so caught up with money and politics that it's not existing as a religion anymore. So this is a group of people that kind of do away with the concept that the entire idea of Scientology was made up just to be made up, because they don't want anything to do with the organization. They just believe in the ideas of Xenu and the space opera. In research for this, the Church of Scientology called them squirrels to their face. Which is so wild and funny. It was an interview asking them about what they think of the Free Zone Scientologist, and the church leader was like, "Oh, you mean the squirrels?" Rajneesh, also known as Osho, began a new religion commune in Oregon. The core beliefs of the religion were kind of weird. It's sort of the idea that everyone can get there in their own kind of way, and some ideas of Christianity, some of Islam, yada yada. However, it seemed to me like the core reason of this religion existing was so that Rajneesh could have power. And this is kind of supported by the salmonella attacks that occurred in the nearby town of Antelope, Oregon, in which Rajneesh's followers poisoned hundreds of people with salmonella as a means of somehow winning the election in Rajneesh's favor, which didn't work, and Rajneesh got deported, and a bunch of people got arrested. Other core ideas of the religion were family's bad, because the idea is that you focus on your spiritual self rather than children, so parents who join this religion would leave their kids behind in order to follow Rajneesh around. And also free love and stuff like that was encouraged, just don't get married. The Freedomites are essentially a group of true communal anarchists existing in Saskatchewan, Canada. They're against everything from land ownership to public schools and using animals for work, and are most famously known for protesting nude, in the belief that the human body is a perfect creation and clothes are imperfect, so therefore being naked is the perfect existence. And other than that, they just exist on communes and try their best to live autonomously. The Source family, started by Father Yod, is often equated as being one of the first examples of the organic hippie idea. The family, as it's called, were very into an idea known as the Age of Aquarius, which is basically this overarching idea in astrology. What's way more interesting than that is the weird ideas that Father Yod came up with. For example, the band he started, Yahovah 13, was recorded and played in a restaurant he owned, and was used as a means of spreading his message. He started this organization that eventually grew to 150 members out of a 3-bedroom house in LA. Also, more weird details about him. He possibly murdered Jean Ingram's husband so that he could sleep with her. And speaking of sleeping with, or should I say kithing with, he had 14 wives to which he had children by nearly all of them. And he died in a hang gliding accident because, having never hang glided before, he assumed he could do it, in which he could not. He may have been like a really bad dude in real life, I don't know. These stories were just too funny to not laugh at. Reactive Satanism is probably what you think of whenever you think of the word Satanism. Also referred to as adolescent Satanism, it is the idea of taking true accounts of the Satanism from Christianity and simply inverting the values. For example, believing that Satan is Lucifer, the king of evil and the prince of darkness, and that he should be praised for it. The core beliefs of the people is that evil is good, and we should perpetuate as much horribleness in the world as we can as a means of circumventing the sort of status quo. While a lot of this can be seen as sort of edgy behavior, it doesn't change the fact that they are perpetuating bad things to happen to people, or at the very least bad advice, and is the definitive and literal Satan worship. We are now on to tier 8, and we are officially at the point that I do not feel bad calling these people out anymore. Starting with the Bergholz Barbers. This is in reference to a specific sect of the Amish tradition that was started by Sam Mollett in Bergholz, Ohio. If you thought old order Amish were strict, Sam Mollett started a new society because he did not think they were strict enough. While I couldn't find specific details on actions or practices that he did throughout his teachings, it was to the point that whenever he set himself up as the chief bishop of a new commune, only one would show up when you're supposed to have 3 in traditional Amish belief, which led future bishops to think that maybe he's not actually supposed to be a bishop. Whatever the case, Mullen excommunicated a deacon, to which 9 members of the commune then decided to leave, to which he then excommunicated each one of them. Keep in mind a couple things. For one, there was only like 40 people in the entire commune at the time, and excommunication's a big deal because in the Amish belief, if you're excommunicated by one group, you cannot rejoin to any group. So that wasn't just Mullet saying you can't come back here, that's him saying you can't be Amish anywhere, which is a big deal. This was such a point of contention that after several failed investigations, eventually 300 bishops from different Amish communities came together and made the ruling that the Mullet excommunications were null and void because he was too hard on them for the excommunication. Mullet did not like this one bit, and shortly after, the beard attacks began. As mentioned earlier, beards are a big deal in the Amish tradition, so people from Mullet's group ran around breaking into people's houses and violently cutting their beards off, which is how they got the name of the Bergholz Barbers. Eventually they were arrested along with Mullet himself and charged with hate crimes, and each served jail sentences. Some of the traditions were weird too, like it was very apparent that they did not identify as Christian, even though they supposedly held the Christian beliefs of Jesus and whatnot. They made sure Sunday was not a big deal, that there was no Sabbath. For some reason, they stuck to the Old Testament, which again makes the Sabbath thing more confusing. And then, oddly enough, kithing was totally fine. Not totally fine, it's not like it was encouraged, but whereas in other groups it was a shameful thing, they just didn't care. Which, why be so strict about the other stuff, but whatever. Children of God, which is now rebranded as the Family International, was a sort of apocalyptic cult. They had ideas of salvation through self and through each other, with an overarching idea that the world around them or the system was always coming to get them. Children of God is rather well known for the controversies they ran into, and rightfully so, as one of the group's main ideologies was that of, like free love at all times, with whoever you want at any point, feel free. There's a documentary of them on Netflix, in which in the documentary you can see at random times all over the place. This didn't just extend to people within the community, this extended to their idea of God. So much so that one of their chief strategies in order to get new converts was something called flirty fishing, in which the women were encouraged to go out and be street hookers, and then after doing the stuff, use the opportunity to tell them about God. I hate it here. To give you an idea of how awful they were, their Bible tracts that they would hand out would get held up as custom agencies because it was pornography. The group was eventually shut down and several arrested, or at least the original group was, over pedophilia charges, as this whole idea of free love didn't exactly care about age of consent laws. And the founder, David Berg, eventually died, although the now rebranded Family International is in this weird hypocritical stage where they both support his teachings and then deny he did anything wrong, while also accepting that pedophilia is wrong and then denying that he did it, which he did. And it's so dumb. It's weird. A lot of the stuff that I'm not mentioning here is really gross. As I mentioned earlier, there's a documentary on Netflix, which if you're interested is worth your time, called The Children of God. But yeah, really gross people. Moving on. The People's Temple, also known as the People's Temple of the Disciples of Christ, is the infamous Jim Jones cult. The core beliefs of the idea was this combination of Christianity and communism. However, that really didn't matter because the real core belief was whatever Jim Jones said. Jim Jones was charismatic, and he sort of had this reel-in tactic in which he would get people interested in his society and then eventually entrap them there. While the group was located in San Francisco, they had several instances of people trying to get away by whatever means, or else knowing they would be hunted down by members of the society. Eventually, facing public scrutiny, Jim Jones, along with several of his followers, moved to Guyana in South America and started their own town, which was named very humbly Jonestown. By 1978, there were over 900 people in the commune. That was until Representative Leo Ryan investigated with a journalist team on accounts of child abuse occurring there. While investigating, a few members of the commune came up to the representative and said they wanted to leave with him, to which the representative allowed them. While trying to leave from a nearby airstrip, members of Jonestown came over with guns and killed the representative, 3 journalists, and one of the Jonestown members. Later that evening, realizing that he wasn't going to get to play God anymore, except for this one last time, he had the entire commune drink cyanide-laced Kool-Aid, killing a total of 918 people, Jim Jones himself being one of them. It's a very frustrating case because it's always just felt to me like because he realized he lost, he wanted everyone else to lose too. And it's also an example of what one person with the right words and enough manipulation can get away with. Nicaean heresies was kind of hard to find something on. I believe this is in reference to the Nicene Creed. It's basically an idea that comes from the roots of Orthodox Christianity and puts away ideas such as Arianism, which is the idea that Christ exists in between that of being a God and man, Apollinarianism, which is the idea that Christ had no soul, Neosterianism, which is the idea that Christ had 2 souls, one from human and one from God, and Eutychianism, which is the idea that Christ was God and therefore couldn't be a sacrifice for man. And it's basically just 4 rules saying that we do not believe these things, therefore Christ can be what it says he is in the Bible. So I'm guessing that this would be believing in those 4 things, or one of those 4 things, which would essentially be with like Christianity without Christ. I don't know, make your own inference. Siberian Old Believers are Eastern Orthodox Christians maintaining the beliefs of the Russian Church. Or in other words, they still hold fast to the ideas of ancient Greek translations and Old World customs rather than new ideas of what Christianity is supposed to be. Also, every example I could find of them exists in the middle of nowhere. Like traveling hundreds of miles through the Siberian wilderness, you would find a small church, and you could probably bet to yourself that it's a Siberian Old Believer, which is why they have the name Siberian Old Believers. NIXVM was a company that was used as a front for a Kith cult. On the surface, it was a multi-level marketing scheme. However, beneath the surface, there's a group known as the Dominus Obsequious Sororium. I'm not pronouncing that. It went by DOS, D-O-S. Essentially, the leader of the company had been taking in women and keeping them as slaves, all the way to the point of branding his name on them, in which other higher up levels of the company also had slaves. And yeah, gross. This entire thing was outed in 2018 and was one of the first mainstream examples of trafficking existing in higher level elitist circles. The Soldiers of Heaven are as an Islamic doomsday cult existing in Iran. They hold the belief that their God will return if enough damage is caused on Earth. Therefore, they want to cause a lot of damage on Earth. There are very, very few of them, less than 1,000, and the majority of them exist as farmers without really the means to do so. However, it's a belief of several Iranian officials that this group or ideology could be dangerous if given the means to carry out their ideas. Lucien Pulvermarker was one of those sedeventists, the ones who don't like the Pope, who in 1998 was declared by other sedevacentists to be Pope Pius VIII. Essentially, they all agreed that this guy knows what he's talking about, and they don't like the real pope, so this guy's pope now. To which he then made all of them bishops, and then they made each other bishops, and it's the equivalent of a bunch of bros like all shaking hands and giving high fives to each other, and I really like it. Especially all these pictures of him just like standing in his backyard as the pope. I love it. It's cute. Easter lightning is an Eastern Asian belief that is pretty much the same as Christianity, except they believe that Jesus currently exists on earth in the form of a Chinese woman. This comes from in the book of Revelations when it says, "As lightning goes across the eastern sky, so will the return of our Lord," which is why the group is called Eastern Lightning. It began in 1995 when a woman who has never been officially identified, but it is pretty well understood, goes by the name of Yang Zibing. I'm sorry, I'm butchering these, who said that she experienced voices from God telling her she was meant for great things. When a year later, a man who was an at the time leader of the church named Zhao Weishan said that she was not only receiving messages from Jesus, but that she was Jesus. And they just kind of operate besides that with knowing Jesus is the woman in the congregation. The group has got a lot of bad publicity, and I can't really verify if it's the group intentions to do these things or if it's just radicals. For example, in 2002, there were kidnappings of people of other nearby religions that supposedly members of Eastern Lightning did. Furthermore, before the 2012 December 21st End of the World event, there were several riots that started up in China that was once again blamed on the church. And in 2014, a man walked into a cafe, and after people didn't want to hear his gospel message, he killed a woman behind the counter, and he later identified as a member of Eastern Lightning. So are these a bunch of zealots who feel extra pumped to do crazy things because they think their God's on earth with them, or is it just a bad rap? I don't know, but I know that Western Christians in the area, or more specifically underground church members, say that the Eastern Lightning is a terrorist organization. So make of that what you will. We are now on to tier 9, the final tier, which is very specific instances of crazy cult activities. Oh boy. The first of which being Juhaman al-Atayabi, I promise I'm trying with these, who in 1979 seized the Grand Mosque in Saudi Arabia. See, he believed that the Saudi government was weak. His father and grandfather fought in wars for them, and he didn't like the idea that Saudi was now making deals with Western society. So, him and 500 of his followers stormed the mosque and for 2 weeks held off any entry into it. The standoff was eventually ended after French GIGN commandos came in order to direct the Saudis of how to attack, to which Atayabi and several of his men were captured and then beheaded for their crimes. But it's still a pretty big deal historically because he got enough people together in order to take the Grand Mosque. Things I can't talk about, like why was there a temple? Why was there a pyramid? Why did he drive to this person's island right before? Why is... Alright, so I'm going to get, like Odyssey, it's this off, I'll talk about whenever I do it, but I'm going to make videos on there that I can't talk about on YouTube because I really want to talk about this, but this gets a video zapped immediately. I've seen it happen, and we'll get there. The Manson family is a reference to the cult that was started by Charles Manson. The group was, on the surface, your standard hippie level stuff. They liked taking parts in drugs and living on communes. However, it's whenever you got into the beliefs of the cult that you started to see the cracks. For example, members of the commune thought that the leader, Charles Manson, was a reincarnation of Jesus himself. Manson himself preached on a coming apocalyptic race war that was going to begin, and how they needed to begin a race war in order to confirm that they'll be safe. This was an event that Manson referred to as Helter Skelter in reference to the Beatles song. This led to, in 1969, the Sharon Tate murders, as they're called, in which he had several of his followers go out and kill 9 people over the course of several weeks, the most famous of which being whenever they broke into Sharon Tate's house, killed her along with 3 friends, and staged it in order to look like African Americans did it in such a way to start a race war, to which they said that they would eventually win and come out on top. And all the research I've done about Manson over the years, it seems to me that he's a Jim Jones type. He was a type of person who liked to be in control, he liked to have others do his bidding, and he wasn't afraid to hurt other people to get it done. The LeBaron family probably exist on the farthest possible extreme of Mormonism that you could reach. For one, they were kicked out of the church for polygamy, but the son of the leader, Alma LeBaron, said that he had dreams where he talked to the prophets and that he himself was meant to be the replacement for Joseph Smith. Eventually, they started a compound of a few hundred members in Chihuahua, Mexico. They have had several odd altercations with the locals, such as one in which one of the sons was kidnapped and held for ransom. The family didn't pay ransom in order to not encourage ransoming kidnappings, so they let the son go. The son then went on this whole political thing as to say that ransoming is bad, to which the cartel then got 2 more members of the commune and then killed them because the son was talking bad about kidnappings. There was also an odd altercation that took place regarding a well on their property in which they apparently shot at the neighbors for getting too close to their well. And then on the Sonora Highway, which you may remember from a couple years ago in 2019, 3 women and 6 children from the compound were killed by the cartel, although it is believed in that case that the cartel mistaked them for a rival gang. Alright, so this one's weird. Remember Nation of Islam that I talked about at the beginning, and how essentially like white people bad, and then the Church of Scientology, which even though they don't have any race rules are primarily white? Well, apparently there is an ally between the Nation of Islam and the Church of Scientology. According to the Nation of Islam, because they've been asked, I thought white people were awful, why go with a primarily white religion? They have said it's because they have recognized the greater world around us, in other words, the idea of space and the space opera and the aliens that created us and whatever. And they have gone so much so with this that 700 members of the Nation of Islam have been inducted as part of the Church of Scientology. This is all to return them to a mother wheel, which is essentially a giant UFO, which will come down and take them away whenever it decides to come take them away. Also, the belief of the Nation of Islam has always been that white people will be left behind whenever that happens, although in recent years they've changed their tune after siding, or at least sort of siding with the Church of Scientology, and said, maybe a few. Lev Tahor is a very niche group of Judaism that only has about 200 members. Most of their beliefs are very conservative compared to normal Judaism, such as very long prayers, arranged marriages at teenage years, and the females are to be covered from head to toe from the ages of 3 on. They're also anti-Zionist, which means they don't really believe in the sanctity of Israel itself, and exists sort of nomadically, such as their compound began in Canada and exists currently in Mexico. In Canada, however, they were ran out of the country after several investigations of child abuse, because that whole teenage marriage thing isn't always teenager to teenager, sometimes teenager to not teenager, as well as kidnapping children, which maybe, I don't know. They then moved the compound to Mexico, in which the leader of the church, Shalomo Helbrons, drowned while conducting one of his rituals that he was underwater for. I don't know, it was weird. And the religion's pretty much broken up now, as they've all been arrested by the combined might of the FBI and Interpol, so yeah, that's that. Workers' Institute of Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong Thought is basically just a communist thing. I don't know what else to call it. It had 8 members, including the leader. The leader was a guy named Aravidian Balakrishnan, who was kicked out of the Leninist Marxist group in London. And after his group, which had 14 people in it at the time, was searched for trafficking drugs, he decided to move the group underground with the 7 people that were still in it. Those 7 people being all women who he took as his wives and then made do chores and essentially treated them like slaves. So I guess real convenient for him. Oh, look, I'm the only guy in a commune of 8 and I need 7 kids. He eventually got arrested for abuse and trafficking and other things. So it's just really lame to think about just one guy who's like, he has a cult and there's 7 people in it. Like, imagine you start a religion and you can't even make a football team out of it. So Anthill Kids kind of got me down a rabbit hole reading it. And I've got to say, from all the research I've done, this has got to be one of the most disturbing cult reads I have ever gone on. And there is a ton of information and there's so much to get into that I just decided I'm going to do a separate video on it. Probably shortly after this one goes up. To not totally leave you hanging on what it is, essentially a man by the name of Roch Heralt started a commune in Ontario, Canada, in which he slowly brought in people over the years, but he slowly became more and more abusive, to the point by the end of it there was murders, there was crazy goings on with what he was doing to some of the members, which eventually led to one of the members escaping, telling the police, to which he was then arrested, tried, put in jail for life, and then his cellmate killed him because of how bad he was. So yeah, I'm going to do a whole video about it because the specifics are really gruesome and there's too much to get into on a video that's already too long. So stay tuned for that if you're interested. The reason I hesitate to call him the most evil cult leader I've ever heard of is because of the next one on this list, Marcus Wesson. Marcus Wesson has got to be one of the most frustratingly evil people I've ever read about. I want to emphasize with this one is probably the most graphic. Well, I'm not going to show any images or say anything too overt. It is a rather intense theme, so again, viewer discretion advised. Okay. Put it bluntly, after he returned from Vietnam, he began living with a woman which he had a son with. However, the woman had a daughter by another man, to which whenever that daughter turned 8, he began abusing the child. And then he married that child, who he then had 10 children with. And then out of all of the girl children, he also began abusing them when they turned 8. Yeah, no jokes. This one's just depressing. He had all of the girls homeschooled, and he was the only one allowed to interact with the daughters. The mother was not allowed to have contact with her own girls. And he read them a Bible that he wrote himself, in which he said Jesus was a vampire and that he himself was God. He also told them about Armageddon and told his daughters that they were meant to be his future wives. The girls were also ordered that they were not allowed to talk to their brothers or their mother. As aforementioned, the abuse kept up to a point until which extended family figured out what was going on and got the local police involved. The police then showed up to Marcus's house, in which a standoff began. He walked inside with his gun. The police did not hear gunshots, however, after getting inside, Marcus had killed all 9 people that were in the house. A few of the kids got away, but Marcus managed to kill his wife and all of the children that were in the house at the time. If it makes you feel even a little bit better, he's currently awaiting the death penalty, even though it's been 11 years. And while it's easy to look at these situations and blame other people around, I want to emphasize that the mother at the time, who was also killed by Marcus, was 16, and considering the amount of abuse that she went through, I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that she was responsible, or at least in any magnitude that you could shame her over. I think predominantly and alone, Marcus is one of the most evil people I've ever read about, and all the blame squarely falls on him. What I mean by there's such a frustratingly evilness to it is similar to Jim Jones. It's like whenever they can't play God anymore, they just literally end everyone else's lives around them. Only with Marcus, it seems to be much more malicious and just depraved. I'll try to perk everyone back up at the end, but that's enough of that. Let's move on. Heaven's Gate refers to the cult that was started in 1974 by the couple Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nessel. The two believed themselves to be the witnesses of Revelation, or in other words, in the book of Revelations in the Christian Bible, when it says there will be 2 witnesses who foretell the coming of Christ. They managed to catch a staggering following with this ideology and got to the point that they sort of existed as vagabonds until they made their way out to California. The entire time sort of living this nomadic lifestyle as they went across the country, that is until 1996. In 1996, whenever the comet Halley-Bopp went by, the two believed that behind it was a spaceship that was supposed to take them into the afterlife, and the only way to catch it was if they were dead. They managed to convince 38 other members of the Heaven's Gate cult to commit suicide with them. They did this by eating a concoction of phenobarbital and applesauce, to which they all went and laid on their beds and waited for the end. This actually took place over the course of 3 days, in which one group would do the deed, to which the next group would then clean up, make preparations for them to do it, and so on and so forth. They all wore matching tracksuits with matching Nike shoes. One of the reasons for it being one of their group's mottos was just do it, and the Nike logo, you get it. They also all wore armbands that said Heaven's Gate Away Team, and each had $5.75 in their pocket. This is a reference to in the book Huckleberry Finn, whenever a character says all it takes is $5.75 to get a ride to heaven on the nearest comet. What's really weird is even after the Heaven's Gate cult, several of the members who were not a part of it later committed suicide themselves. Some attribute this to a sense of survivor's guilt, while others see it as a lack of purpose. But it's interesting the effect that this one couple had on so many people in such a personal way. Unknown bunkers is in reference to the fact that there are a ton of unknown bunkers that exist across the world, especially the US. Not only have random bunkers been found in the bases of abandoned buildings that have satanic or Latin text scribbled on them, but also think about it this way. There's a lot of companies that sell bunker supplies or entirely made bunkers for groups to stay in. But how many bunkers do you actually know about? Which means they've got to be around here somewhere, and assuming all of them aren't just going to doomsday preppers, then what are some of them for? Which could possibly lead into the final theory of the entire iceberg, actual Illuminati. So a lot of people throw around the name Illuminati a lot as a joke, right? But what are they really? Well, it's believed the original foundations of the Illuminati come from the original foundations of the Freemasons. The Freemasons trace their origin all the way back to the original temple built in Israel under King Solomon, with the idea that they will always exist as a sort of unseen hand behind the scenes of world powers. Well, the Illuminati was officially made in 1776. However, due to several sort of traditional Christian beliefs at the time, they were made illegal almost everywhere, especially in France, which is where they originated. Their belief was very anti-God, with the idea that we ourselves should be the own deciders of our fate and shouldn't look to a higher power, something we don't truly understand. And instead, people need people to rule over them. So even if they don't know we're doing it, we'll do that for them. The plan among members was that after they were outlawed, they would slip into hiding in a sort of secret society and simply continue to act from behind the scenes, with several believing that they are directly responsible for the French Revolution. Here's what's so interesting about them. We have no way of knowing the capacity to which they exist. If it's true and they are interconnected with the Freemasons, then that means everyone who's a high-ranking Freemason could possibly be implicit with it. Or if they died out and they didn't successfully join together, then there's nothing to worry about. However, the problem is, if they don't exist or they exist at full capacity, there's no way for any of us to be able to tell the difference. The disappearance of them from the earth could mean they're really, really bad or really, really good at what they're doing. The real Illuminati, and the reason that it's proliferated so much in conspiracy theories, is because it's the very literal equivalent of watching a shark fin dive under the water. Did it go away, or is it still swimming where it's always been? And that is it for the religion and cult iceberg. I want to emphasize, especially with some of the bottom stuff and how some of these were very kind of anti-human or anti-righteous in their presentation. This is a video to specifically discuss the worst of the worst as it's publicly known. If you want to see what humanity has done with beliefs and ideas and inspiration, just look around you. There are an infinite number of positive outcomes that have come from ideas of love and charity and giving that completely outweigh everything I just talked about. It's exactly like I talked about in the disturbing iceberg vid. Yeah, it's fun to look in the rabbit hole and see how deep it goes, but you gotta remember to take your head out, because in the grand scheme of things, the rabbit hole ain't that big. And as I've said before, yeah, the world can be a pretty bad place sometimes, but it can be a pretty cool place too. And part of that coolness is you all sticking around and watching this video, and I sincerely mean it. Thank you for watching. My social links, as well as the artist and editor social links, will be in the description below. So please, more than me, give them a shout out, talk to them, say hi or whatever, because they deserve it. My links to the subreddit, Twitter, sweatshirt, and Patreon, as well as the original image of this iceberg, will be in the description as well. I don't have the name of the guy who created this iceberg. I'll look for it as soon as this goes up or before it goes up to see if I can find it, but if I do, I'll put it in the description as well to give them credit. And as you can see next to me, these are all my beautiful top tier patrons. I love them so much. And while I'm at it, thank you so much to everyone for watching. You all are the best. It means the world. Thank you for the absurd number of subscribers I'm up to now, which is beyond my comprehension and beyond what I deserve. Yeah, you mean the most. Thank you all. Thank you to all of my patrons. I sincerely mean it as always. I cannot do this without you guys. And thank you to my top tier patrons, as you can see here. You all mean the most, and I really do mean that. Thank you. Next video, the Anthill Kids, will probably be start of next week, as I'm taking the rest of this week off because of spring break. And then after that, we'll have the conclusion of Tier 7 of the Conspiracy Iceberg. But as always, if you don't care about any of that, as I said, thank you for watching. You all mean the most. Thank you for sticking through this with me, and I will see you in the next one.